I got to thank my father, Larry Foster, for introducing me to Alan West. First time I met Alan, I said, "Aren't you afraid of what people are going to say?" And he leaned in and he said, "I've had people shooting at me." Okay, he is the third of 4 generations of military service in his family. During his 22-year career in the United States Army, Lieutenant Colonel West served in several combat zones and received many honors, including a Bronze Star, 3 Meritorious Service Medals, 3 Army Commendation Medals. In 1993, he was named U.S. Army ROTC Instructor of the Year. In 2010, he was elected to Congress in District 22 in Florida. As a member of the 112th Congress, he was instrumental in passage of the 2011-2012 National Defense Authorization Acts. I think y'all know he's a Fox News contributor. He's also wrote a book called Guardian of the Republic. He is steadfast and loyal. And he is also an avid distance runner, master scuba diver, motorcyclist, and in his spare time he roots for his beloved Tennessee football team. Come on up. Please welcome Alan West.
Thank you. Wow. Thanks a lot. I guess I can go home now, huh? Well, greetings from the other Rotary Club that I'm a member of, Preston Center Rotary Club. So please, Mr. President, make sure that you tell them that I was here because I missed Wednesday morning. But I want to take about 15 to 20 minutes to talk to you, give you some quick perspectives and insights. But the most important thing, I'd like to have your questions. There's so much that I could talk about. I mean, we can, national security policy, foreign policy, economic policy, healthcare, you name it, what we see going on on our streets right now. But everything comes back to one simple thing, and that's service. And that's the great thing about this Rotary. And I want to share with you a quote that a lot of people probably have never heard of, but it's an important quote to understand what our founding fathers believed service was supposed to be about. And it goes like this. Nothing so greatly impels a man to regard the interests of his constituents than the certainty of returning to the general mass of the people from whence he was taken, where he shall participate in their burdens. That was George Mason in his speech on 17 June 1789 for the Virginia Ratifying Convention of our Constitution. When the founding fathers thought about service, they thought about servant leadership. They thought about citizen servants. They never thought that we would have career politicians. They always thought that the American people would be represented by those people that reflected who they were and their perspectives and their backgrounds. What the founding fathers of George Mason talked about it in his speech that he gave were periodic rotations, which we come to understand means term limits. See, the problem that I think that we have here in the United States of America is twofold. We can sit around and we can blame the politicians all that we want, but a lot of that onus has to come back to us. Because they do not get to be elected officials unless we are the ones electing them. And if we don't go back and study and understand fundamentally the principles and the philosophy of governance that established these great United States of America, then we lose the sense, we lose the essence of who we are. For instance, Washington, D.C. was built on a swamp. No, that's a real story. Okay, it is a swamp. But so many Americans, do you understand why they have this recess thing in August? Because historically, the hottest month in Washington, D.C. is the month of August. So before the time when they had, the air conditioning and everything, they would take their break in August, and they called it the recess. It was a time to get away from the incredible heat and humidity. There is no wind that flows up there in Washington, D.C. But when the American people don't understand their history, when the American people don't understand their past, they don't understand the present, and you're going to lose sight of the future. So now people can say we need to take a vacation or recess. See, recess originally meant for these individuals to go back to their jobs as a doctor, as a lawyer, as a businessman, as a soldier, as a farmer, whatever. But when we have lost this sight of fundamentally what the United States of America was intended to be, and I always like to go out and ask people this simple question, and I'm going to ask you, you don't have to answer, but is America a constitutional republic or a democracy? Well, I didn't say you had to answer. You know, that's like the annoying kid that sits around and says, I know, teacher, I know, you know. But if you go out and ask that to your friends, if you go out and ask that in your communities, in your circles, how many people really know what that answer is? And if you ask your children and your grandchildren and their friends, how many people really understand and know? See, the problem in the United States of America, and this can come back to all the policy issues that I'm sure you're going to ask me about, is that we don't understand the 5 basic fundamentals of this constitutional republic. And if you go back and you study and read the Declaration of Independence, you study and read the Federalist Papers, if you read the entire United States Constitution, I'm going to challenge you all. Maybe you didn't do it this 4th of July, Independence Day, but please do it the next Independence Day. Sit down with your family and read the entire Declaration of Independence and understand why this country was established and discuss it with your family. Understand why Thomas Jefferson wrote that your inalienable rights do not come from man, they come from a creator, and study and understand what natural rights theory and law is. And then maybe you will take the time to look up a guy by the name of John Locke, an English political philosopher, who wrote of the natural rights to an individual are life, liberty, and property. Jefferson, for whatever reason, changed it from property to the pursuit of happiness. But if we don't study and understand these things, if we don't pass it on generation from generation, if we don't understand that everything about this country goes back to limited governance, everything about this country is about fiscal responsibility, everything about this country is about individual sovereignty. There was no other nation that the world has ever known where it established the preeminence of the individual. That was up front and personal in the Declaration of Independence. Our free market, free enterprise economic system, it is what has made us the greatest nation that the world has ever known in 241 years. I've been to 13 different countries and 3 different combat zones. No one has achieved what we have achieved in 241 years. It is absolutely phenomenal. It is absolutely amazing. And the last thing that's so important is our strong national defense, our security. It says that in the preamble of the Constitution, that the federal government is supposed to provide for the common defense and promote the general welfare. You know, I'm just a simple southern boy from down in Georgia, used to jump out of airplanes, but I know the difference between an active and a passive verb. Provide for the common defense is an active verb. Promote the general welfare, that's a passive verb. But if we're not careful, people start to confuse those verbs, and the next thing you know, people are talking about providing general welfare. And if you ever take the time to listen to a lot of the debates that are up there on the House floor, that's what everyone goes back to say, you know, we have the responsibility to provide the common welfare. And so therefore, if you're not careful, the government expands, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger because they believe everything has to be provided from the government to you. There are 3 rights that you have: the life, the liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The mortgage meltdown that happened in 2008, you can trace it back to 1978 with Jimmy Carter. When Jimmy Carter came out and said every American has a right to own a home. And look at all the policies that came after that that led up to a 2008 mortgage meltdown. And the exact same thing will happen if we start to believe that government is the giver of all of these different rights, being it health care, being it education, whatever. Because the next thing you know, as government believes that they can give you all of these rights, then the government can also, made up a man, can be the one that takes them away. It's easy to say we're going to give you something. But think about how this country was established. Not about people being given something, but it's about people being able to have the ability to go out and achieve and attain it. When our founding fathers and mothers came up to the Mississippi River and they sought to expand this great nation out west, they didn't stop at the river and say, okay, who's going to build us a bridge? Who's going to come out here and shoot a buffalo for me and, get me something to eat? The indomitable entrepreneurial spirit, the rugged individualism of the American people has always been that which has made us different. No matter where you have come from, no matter where you are born. But if we're not careful, we don't understand these fundamentals, if we don't understand that foundation, and realize this, when you go to build a house, the first thing you got to lay is a foundation. If we forget what that foundation is, and all of a sudden we believe that we're a nation that believes in wealth redistribution, if we believe that we're a nation that believes in nationalizing our production, we don't respect the private sector. I'm going to be very honest. One of the most disrespectful things, one of the most, condescending things that any American leader has ever said to the American people was when someone stood up and said, if you own a business, you didn't build that. Now, you can say whatever you want, but this nation was built based upon individual entrepreneurship. And 75 to 80% of this nation's economy is small business owners. People that wake up every single day with very thin profit margins, but they go out and they work hard. They're the ones that have that pride in opening up that establishment and hiring other Americans. But if we have such a condescending attitude, such as the same as, Mitch McConnell just showed when he talked about excessive expectations. No. The American people just expect you to do what you say you're going to do and not look upon us as simple serfs that don't understand, what it means to live in a republic, that doesn't understand what it means to have a rule of law, that doesn't mean what it understands to follow through on your promises. We cannot live in a nation where we think that it is a responsibility to have more people dependent. Now, once upon a time when I was a colonel, I could have made you do push-ups because silence your phones. But we cannot live in a country where we think it is better to make more people dependent upon a government. That is not what this country is about. Folks, I grew up in the inner city of Atlanta, Georgia. I grew up in the same neighborhood that gave us Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. My dad was born in 1920 in South Alabama, jumped the Chattahoochee River and grew up in South Georgia. My mom was born in Fort Valley, Georgia, south of Macon. My dad did not graduate from college, but my mother and father challenged me, along with my older brother, to be the first officer in our family. Because Dad had been a corporal in World War II. My mom worked for a Marine Corps headquarters in Atlanta. My older brother was a Lance Corporal, fought in Vietnam. That's what we do in America. We create victors, not victims. But if that's the message that is coming down the pipe, there are more and more people that will sit back and wait for someone to give them something. But all that does is it ruins and it destroys the individual drive and determination to go out and pursue their happiness because someone has told them they can guarantee their happiness. If we don't understand that the culture of the participation trophy, y'all know what I'm talking about, when a bunch of adults decided a long time ago that they wanted to make sure that the self-esteem of kids, they all felt real good, so no matter if you sat on the bench or whatever, everybody got a trophy. That's the exact same culture that now permeates on our college campuses. That's the exact same culture that some of y'all see with people that are just graduating, they're coming into your businesses. What are you going to do for me? I'm entitled to this. I even saw it with young lieutenants coming into the military. When I was a young lieutenant, I didn't want to see a major. I didn't want to see a lieutenant colonel. I'd cross the street and risk being run over by a truck before I saw a senior officer. But then all of a sudden you get these young kids coming in and, hey, I'm the next version of Patton. Let me tell you how you should run this battalion, sir. Oh, really? Let me tell you how you're going to be in another battalion tomorrow morning, okay? But we have fostered this culture of the participation trophy. And that's not who we are. And the last thing that I don't want to see happen in America, we have a Judeo-Christian faith heritage that's so important. You don't believe it's so important? Look at the end of the Declaration of Independence. Right before those 52 men signed their names, they didn't ask for man's providence and guidance. They asked for divine providence. And that's important to understand and realize, a part of this fabric that we have here. So you can talk about tax structure, baseline budgeting, zero-based budgeting. We can talk about, the expansion of Medicaid and all of these different things. Everything comes back to fundamentally and foundationally understanding who we are as a constitutional republic. And if we don't talk about this, if we don't hold our elected officials to standard, and this is not an R&D thing, and let me tell you, it were the Republicans who redistricted me out of the district that I represented in South Florida. And in 2012, I was the #1 target for the Democrat Party. So I did a pretty good job pissing everybody off in Washington, D.C. And the reason being is that 4 generations in my family raised their right hand, and they took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and to bear true faith and allegiance to the same. We didn't take an oath to a political party. We didn't take an oath to a person. We took an oath to that which embodies the essence of who we are as the American people. I believe the greatest days of this country are ahead. I believe that we will rise above the challenges that we see. But it starts with us. It starts with us demanding people be, as George Mason talked about, to go up and represent us and our voices. And if they don't, they must return to the general mass of the people from whence they were taken, where they shall participate in our burdens that they created. That's my challenge to you. Study and understand what it means to live in a constitutional republic. And do not be afraid to stand up and talk about it in your churches, in your communities, and in your circles. Because if you don't, then drip by drip, slowly by slowly, you can lose that which was an incredible blessing, unlike any other nation that the world has ever known. And the greatness of America is that we pass on something better to subsequent generations than what was left to each and every one of us. So God bless you all. What are your questions?
I love your message.
No, it's not mine. It's everybody's. Yeah.
My frustration is I feel helpless when our Dallas school teachers don't teach this, our university professors don't teach this. What chance do we have? And how do we change that? I don't know how to change either one of those systems.
Well, I will tell you, my oldest daughter just graduated with her master's from SMU. She's now at physician assistant school. And when I found out about this little nonsense that was going on over at SMU's campus about, displaying 9/11 and everything like that, I wrote about it. And Governor Abbott found out about it. And I think that over in SMU, they changed that policy back to what it originally was. Because I challenged the president there, it is not your responsibility to hide or shield our children. It is your responsibility to educate them. And there are some tough lessons they need to learn. A college campus is about learning all perspectives and viewpoints. It should be an open place for thought. And what we need to do is use the greatest resource that we have. Number one, our voices. Number two, your resources and your money as alumni to say that I will not stand for this on a campus. And so just the same as in schools, this is why school choice and charter schools and everything is so important to me. My parents made a decision not to send me to a John Pope Elementary School in our neighborhood. They sent me to Our Lady of Lourdes Catholic Church, which is right across the street from Ebenezer Baptist Church. And that is where I had my elementary school education. They made a choice for me which enables me to have that solid foundation. It is your responsibility to educate your child. And you need to make sure, and your grandchildren, and you need to make sure that you are holding our education systems to standard. How many folks have recently seen that video of the 16-year-old in Milwaukee, the public school system, that just attacked a teacher? If you haven't seen it, go back and look at it. I mean, this young kid came up and just cold-cocked the teacher, knocked the teacher down, and just started beating on him. I taught high school for 1 year at Deerfield Beach in South Florida after I retired. 1 year. I volunteered to go back to Afghanistan. Okay? Because I figure if I'm going to be in a combat zone, I need to be armed. Okay? But we are losing that culture battle. Once upon a time, I did not want the teacher to call my parents. Beat me here. I'll do whatever you want, but don't call Herman and Snooks West, because I know what's going to happen. But now the kids say, call my mama. Most times they don't say call my dad, because there's no dad in the home. But they say call my mom. And the mom comes and takes the kid's side. We have a cultural battle in our education system. We are not educating kids, we are indoctrinating kids, and teaching the kid how to take a test is not educating. We are not raising the next generation of critical thinkers.
You mentioned that you made everybody in Washington mad. Thank you so much. You mentioned forefathers. I read the other day that 74% of the population of this country do not want these monuments torn down. 20% had no opinion, and 6%, that leaves 6% that's raising Cain about these monuments. I'd like to know where you stand on this.
Oh, absolutely, and I've written about it. The top 3 states for Confederate memorials are Virginia, my home state of Georgia, and Texas. Now, last year, nobody was talking about these Confederate memorials. Why all of a sudden is this an issue? You know, the 2 largest military installations in the world are Fort Bragg and Fort Hood, Texas. Fort Bragg is named after Braxton Bragg, a Confederate general, and John Bell Hood, of course, from Texas. That's the namesake of Fort Hood. So what are we going to do? Are we going to change the names of Fort Bragg and Fort Hood? I mean, when I was stationed at Fort Bragg and Fort Hood, it wasn't about who is this named after. It was my pride in being a soldier. This is a distraction. And I hate when people distract us and get us away. It's kind of the same as when Commodus created panem et circenses, bread and circuses, because he took the mindset of the Roman people away from all the travails that were going on. He brought back the gladiator games. This is the exact same thing that's happening here. Those monuments, those symbols, it does not offend people. It really doesn't. This is something that's been created. History is not there for us to hate or love. History is there for us to study and learn the lessons of. And there are good lessons and there are bad lessons from history. But as George Santayana said in 1928, those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And I do not like, who are these people sitting in a room deciding what is acceptable and not acceptable for history? The fact that Abraham Lincoln's bus was torched in Chicago, the fact that a Catholic saint's bus was torched out somewhere on the West Coast, this is not what we need to have, because if you don't understand your past, you will not be clear of your present, and you will not be able to understand your future. And furthermore, I will tell you, let me be very honest here. The same people that are out here talking about racism and white supremacy and everything, and look, I hate Klan. I hate neo-Nazis. I hate white supremacists. I hate any kind of supremacist. White, black, Hispanic, Islamic, whatever. I hate them. But why is it that we have an organization called Planned Parenthood that was founded by a white supremacist and a racist who gave speeches at Klan rallies by the name of Margaret Sanger? And the whole purpose that Margaret Sanger brought about was to rid the United States of America of undesirables. Margaret Sanger's philosophy was studied by Joseph Mengele. Do your history. And see, this is the problem that I have. If we don't study and understand these things, if we whitewash it, we get sold any old bad bill of goods. I remember as a young kid, the Klan having rallies on top of Stone Mountain, burning the cross up there. Well, guess what? We ran the Klan out, and I remember as a young kid having church retreats out at Stone Mountain, climbing Stone Mountain myself. And now they're talking about getting rid of the world's largest, raised sculpture on the face of Stone Mountain. Why? they're not offending anyone. Study and understand who Robert E. Lee was. How many people have been to Arlington National Cemetery? We just buried my father-in-law in Arlington National Cemetery 2 months ago. That was Robert E. Lee's property. The house that sits on the hill at Arlington National Cemetery is Robert E. Lee's house. It was taken away from him at the end of the Civil War so that we have a place that we could honor our dead from that Civil War. He fought in the Mexican War. He was an honor student from West Point. He stopped John Brown at Harper's Ferry, and he talked about reuniting this country at the end of the Civil War, not keeping us, separated. But if we whitewash history, first of all, who says what history we should learn? Many of the schools in the United States of America, high schools now, do not teach history prior to 1870. If you're not teaching history prior to 1870, what do you know about the Declaration of Independence? What do you know about the Federalist Papers? What do you know about the Constitution? This is a very dangerous path we're on. Okay.
Colonel West, I have about 3,412 questions to ask.
You only get one.
So I'll just limit it. Day after the election, I asked facetiously my daughter, who's a sophomore at the University of Texas, are you going to go protest with all of those folks? And she said, heavens no, Dad, I'm here to get an education and go to school. My question to you is, do you have a position one way or the other about a military service requirement for all American citizens?
Sure.
And then my second question is, when are you going to run for president?
Oh, stop. That ain't right. Let me tell you about service in our military. We should only want the best to serve in our military, because you have to understand that we are a nation that is engaged in combat. And as a former commander, I do not want to spend, or did not want to spend, and I don't want future commanders to spend 90% of their time on 10% of the problem. Now, what I do think we need to have in the United States of America is some type of national service. There are many different things that young people can do. They can be in the Forestry Service, they can be in the Peace Corps, whatever. But remember what I talked about, the participation trophy thing? Being in the military is not a participation trophy, although some people tend to believe that it is. Being in the military is about those brave young men and women, those incredible warriors, those incredible Spartans that are standing out on freedom's frontier to protect us and our way of life. And I don't want to see us go down the path of saying it's just a come all and then we lose focus. What I am concerned about is what you have just seen over in the Pacific Fleet. Ask yourself, when was the last time you saw 4 naval vessels crash into a civilian merchant ship? I can't think of a single time in my 22 years, okay? There is something that is happening in our military. Ask yourself, all of these crashes of aircraft and helicopters that are going on, it's because we are not doing what we're supposed to do and making sure we have a trained and capable and ready military capacity. And I can speak definitively about this because I talk to my nephew, who is a major in the Army, quite regularly. And he tells me what they're doing. We don't need to be losing these young men and women in peacetime like this because we are not properly funding them, because we're more so worried about social egalitarianism and fairness. There ain't nothing fair in the military, folks. There ain't nothing fair about a bullet hitting you. And I'm 5'9", I'm a pretty strapped-looking soldier, but guess what? I could not be a part of the old guard in Washington, D.C., the 3rd Infantry Regiment. Why? Because the standard is 5'11". So we don't need to change standards. We don't need to say anybody can be a Navy SEAL just because we want everyone to be a Navy SEAL. Because what we ask Navy SEAL, Army Rangers, Delta Force, Special Forces, what we ask them to do is above and beyond. And one of the problems that I see happening is that we're trying to align military culture with civilian culture. It's not the same. United States military, you give up your rights. You have the Uniform Code of Military Justice. When you can take money from a person because they don't have a good haircut, that's completely different than civilian society. So we've got to make sure that we have the best capable, and the highest standards for our military. And national service, yes. Compulsory military service, no. Just take care of our military and unleash them to go out there and kill bad guys. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 through 6. Trust in the Lord with all thy heart, lean not upon your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your path. Okay? 3 years ago, I got asked to come here to Dallas, Texas. I prayed about it, and here I am. I don't know where God wants me to be in the future. I know where he wants me to be right now.
Thank you. Every day at the Agape Clinic, I see people who have limited access to medical care, dental care. I'd like for you to speak about what you think the solution is. I mean, is it partnerships with nonprofits like ours who serve anyone who needs care? This year, we're on pace to hit 17,000 patient visits, all at a ridiculously low rate. I mean, or do you think a single payer system is something that the country should look for?
I will tell you no on the latter. The reason why I say no on the latter, because of what just recently happened in England with the little baby Charlie Gard. There was not a doctor that made the decision whether or not that child would live and die. It was a government bureaucrat that made that decision. And that is not what we want to have here in the United States of America. And if you read the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, they do have an agency called the Independent Payment Advisory Board, and they make all of the pricing decisions that deal with Medicare and Medicaid, which I don't like that happening. I did not like voting on doc fix. I mean, I don't know how many medical doctors are here, but you have politicians voting on, what a doctor should be getting paid. That's not the right thing. This is what we need to do. The Patient Protection and Affordable Care is two things. It was a wealth redistribution scheme. There were 20 new taxes in it. Okay, you can go down and look at all those new taxes. And the other thing was that it was an expansion of Medicaid. If you're expanding Medicaid, what you're basically saying is that here you have the poverty line, and everything below the poverty line is supposed to be Medicaid. You just took that line and you just made it higher. But what happens with the services? What happens to the access to health care? The government comes down saying you have health insurance does not equate to you having health care. And that is the problem that we see happening. And furthermore, what is happening is there are many doctors that are out there that are saying, I'm not going to accept it because they don't get the reimbursable rates. So we need to sit down and go back to the table. The first thing we need to do is there's a gap, and that's the gap is called the working poor. They are the people that are above this poverty line, but they're below this line where they could really afford, quality insurance. Two things you need to do. First of all, health savings accounts. You need to expand the use of health savings accounts, but the Affordable Care Act taxes health savings accounts, which was not supposed to be done. The second thing is you look at how those individuals here in that group can then take their health insurance that they're going out and buy and allow them to claim it on their taxes. Not about subsidy, but allow them to claim that on their taxes. Then the other thing that we need to do is we need to make health insurance portable. We need to break down the state-by-state many monopolies that are out there. The fact that I moved from Florida to Texas, I should not then all of a sudden lose health care coverage. Okay? And this antiquated thing about tying health care to a job, that's okay, but that cannot be the standard. And so we have to put the patient, in charge of selecting what is best for them as far as their health insurance coverage, not someone trying to mandate a program from on high, because basically what you're doing is a certain group of individuals are paying for that which they say is free. And so that's why, again, this was that great, scheme that comes out of Washington, D.C. You have a right to it, everyone's going to get it, but in the end, no one gets it. And like I said, just remember what happened to that little baby Charlie Gard. When even the United States of America said that we would allow this child to come here and get medical treatment, and the government of the United Kingdom said no. That's not what I want. And look, if you think socialism works very well, take a trip to Venezuela. Have fun eating in a garbage can, okay? But that's not how we want to live here.
Last question.
Okay,
He said, make it short.
different,
Oh.
Different topic, geopolitical, international
Oh, my
geopolitical,
God.
that's what that means. So, the three great superpowers these days, United States, Russia, China, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we have a presidential administration that is trying to align with Russia. I don't want to say align, I don't have the right words, but to create a relationship with China, I mean Russia, to put pressure on China.
No, let me tell you. Here are your geopolitical threats that are out there. You got Russia, you got China, you got Iran, you got North Korea. Okay, that's the new axis that are forming. Now, I can draw, the next line down, Syria, Venezuela, Cuba, whatever, but those are the four major ones. But then also, those are your state belligerent actors out there. You have this other thing out there, this incredible entity that is transnational called the Global Islamic Jihad. I mean, and they have some connection to some states. I think one of the most important things you heard the president say at the beginning of this week, Monday, first time, and I spent 2.5 years in Afghanistan. The first time we have ever realized, and anyone has ever said that Pakistan is a problem. Pakistan has long since been a problem, and no one has been wanting to stand up and say that. I remember being on the border with Pakistan and Afghanistan, looking through my binoculars at Spin Boldak, and I could see the Taliban walking around. And all of us knew when winter was coming in, all the bad guys, they would go across border, go back into Pakistan, hang out there and everything. And we know all of these routes. We know all of these cave complexes. Why? Because back during the Soviet-Afghan War, 79-89, we were working with the Mujahideen in Pakistan and helping them to flow back into Afghanistan. And if you want to think about the parallels, exact same thing in Vietnam. You were not going to do what was right in Vietnam until you dealt with Laos and Cambodia. And we refused to deal with Laos and Cambodia, and so that was the staging ground that came in. The fact that we are now looking for a strategic partnership with India is so important because India and Pakistan, they are at odds. And all the money we've been giving to Pakistan, they have been using to build up their military against India. And Pakistan is also working on this economic Silk Road project that goes from the Middle East back to China with the Chinese. Russia's economy is not strong. It's collapsing. The number one thing we can do to undermine Russia is start shipping our liquefied natural gas over to Eastern Europe. And if you start to do that, if you erode his economy, then Russia cannot threaten the Ukraine, Russia cannot threaten the Baltics, and he cannot continue to support what's going on in Syria. And the other thing with the Chinese, too, the relationship between China and North Korea, China is like the crack house, North Korea is like the pit bull guarding the crack house. You take down the crack house, you're going to take care of the pit bull, okay? But the most important thing with them is the economic pressure that we put on. China still holds 22 to 23% of the debt of the United States of America. That's why tax reform is so important, to get our economy back growing, to get that debt to GDP ratio, in a better state. But then also we need to make sure that we're building those strategic alliances with South Korea, with Japan, and Vietnam. If you go look through history, the Vietnamese and Chinese ain't never liked each other. Never liked each other, thousands of years. That's an important ally that we can leverage against China. And so we have to start looking at these regional hegemonic dominances. Iran, this is a big concern. Iran is looking to build a land bridge from Iran all the way across to the Mediterranean. And they have done that. And this is why I think one of the most important things we can do is support the Kurdish people, very pro-Western, very pro-American. And if you cut that off and you allow them to have an independent country, they don't like the Iranians. That's how we start. America plays checkers. Everyone else is playing chess. And remember that too often we base our national security policy and our foreign policy on election cycles. It has to be consistent. We can't continue with the yo-yo effect of every 4 years or 8 years or whatever because you got people with a 100-year plan. And for the first time, we finally heard, the president say, we don't need the nation bill. When you send someone like me over to a country like Afghanistan, wherever, I'm not there to build roads. I'm not there to build schools. I'm there to do one single doggone thing. Find a bad guy and kill him. And I hate to tell you all, but in certain circles, in certain places in the world, that's all they understand. When you sit down and talk to them and try to make nice with, they don't get it. I will never forget the time in Kandahar province when a Canadian major went into a village in Afghanistan and took off his helmet to sit down with a bunch of folks in that village. You know what ended up happening to him? Somebody planted an axe in his head. The mentality that they understand is the strong person. And so we need to go on offense. We need to take a fight to them because that's what Islamic jihadism understands. So that's where I see our geopolitical and foreign policy strategy.
Is that why Turkey is against the Kurdish state?
Turkey is against the Kurdish state because they fear an independent Kurdish state because of the pressure it will put upon them. And understand this, if there are two people that have been the big financiers of Islamic jihadism, Qatar being one, you saw the Saudis call them out, and Turkey and Erdogan is another. Erdogan is a bad apple. So with that being said, I'm getting the hook. God bless you all, and thank you.
Congressman, thank you very much. Let's give a warm round of applause to Congressman Allen West.